Howdy. Now to have your attention when the audience, typically in where I'm from in Texas, when the speaker says howdy, the audience says howdy back. So howdy. That lets me know that you are focused up here. My name is Matthew Hudson. I'm a configuration manager MVP. I work for Schlumberger. We're an oil field services company. I'm a systems engineer, and today we'll be discussing understanding console extensions for Configuration Manager 2007 and 2012. Let's see a show of hands at least. Who has never heard of console extensions or right-click tools? A couple of people. How many use them but have only used the installers that Rick or Roger or those people that have built to install automatically for you? Okay. So our agenda today, we'll go over what are console extensions. We're going to talk about the 2007 console extensions, since a lot of us are probably still on 2007. We're going to look at 2012. Since it's now released, we're all going to move to it in the next couple months, right? And then we'll talk about the differences between 2007 and 2012. So what are console extensions? By definition, they're extending the usefulness of the Configuration Manager console for implementing actions, nodes, forms, views, management classes. Most of us, the community, are using actions. That is something we built external so we can right-click and perform an action outside the console. Most of the vendors, the people who are actually writing managed code, are utilizing nodes, forms, and so forth to put it inside the console so it has a seamless view. On the client side, we talk about client actions. So you could do the policy refresh, you could do the scan state, we're all aware of that. You can also do things that are not part of the normal client actions. You can change the cache size. You can go ahead and change your internet management point. You can kick off other actions. And of course, on the execute programs. So if you want to execute a program on the client side, say you want to kick off a scan on Forefront or McAfee, if you have permissions, you can right-click, and if you can reach that machine, perform an action on it. Console tasks. Reports. For those of you that like to have quick reports, you don't have to run to the report node, find your report, run the report, enter information. It's a time-consuming process. You can simply create a right-click that launches that report, or you can make a right-click that launches the report and passes information to it, such as the computer name or package ID, whatever the report you're looking at. You can also automate processes and workflows, or even things that are task-specific. So for instance, how many of you out there, when you're troubleshooting a client, use the status messages for a specific system? Anybody out there go to that node? Of course, first of all, it's a long process to get to it. You have to go to status messages or system status, run through the process. Then you have to open it. Then you have to type in the computer name. Hopefully you copied it from wherever it was. And then you have to type in a time frame. By the time you've done that, you've wasted your time. You can get to the action. You can run it. But that 2-3 minutes or maybe 4 minutes over a lifetime is hours and hours and hours and dollars wasted. So one thing I created was the ability to right-click and launch the status message directly from the console. We just saved a lot of time. Other things that you can do to automate processes and workflows. Say you want to go ahead and provision a server to be a site system. If you use PowerShell or some other process, you can right-click on a machine, say make it a site system. You can use PowerShell, provision the server, tell it to go in the console, set up the site system, go to IIS, control everything, and of course give you a response back if there's a problem or if it's successful. Other things that you can do inside the console to automate a process. For those of you that use copy packages, you select copy package, you select all of it, then you select your DP. Well, the other way to do it would be to go to the individual package, go to your distribution point, and then select additional distribution points. You have one to many or many to one. Well, you could automate this process by simply creating a standalone tool that selects multiple packages and multiple DPs and then move everything over. So external programs, many of you are aware of that. So the status message viewer is an external program to Configuration Manager, all the way back to 2003. All you have to do is hook into it and pass the correct parameters. Other things you can do for external programs, maybe computer management. You want to manage the services on a machine that's remote. You can bring up the local console configuration or the computer manager and talk to that other machine. So what can console extensions actually do? I'm sure a lot of you are aware of what they can and can't do. For instance, Wake on LAN. How many people here have either purchased or developed a Wake on LAN solution for their company? I was expecting a lot more than that. Okay, so for instance, say there's a crisis and somebody calls and says, you know what, there's been a bridge collapse and we need to bring all the PR group in to get something going. Well, if you have a Wake on LAN solution, depending on what that solution is, you could also use Configuration Manager, right-click on the collection of, let's say, PR group, and wake on that building or wake on that selection. A lot of things you can do. Other things, access client logs. This is a big deal for admins, so that you don't have to interrupt the user, which costs their time and their money, especially let's say they're a lawyer and they're producing time based on, or money based on how much time they're using. So if you can access those client logs, you can pull up a lot of valuable information. We already talked about sending multiple packages to multiple DPs, finding a collection, or a collection location. This was a tool I built after starting with Schlumberger because we had so many collections, and with the team of our size, you can't just keep interrupting people constantly to say, hey, where's this collection? You have to learn it. Well, the easiest way to learn it was to build a tool. So what I did was I had the ability to right-click on any collection, type in a portion of it, say Adobe, find it, and it would give me a list of Adobe, Adobe 10, Adobe 9, so forth, select the collection, and it would give me a tier, and I could actually go and then find that collection. Now, of course, because it's not integrated, it can't jump me to that node. I had to actually go manually move to it. But again, it's a time-saving effort. If you can save 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 minutes a day, that's a lot of your life that you can get back. Determine what a collection of machine is in. This is, again, is another problem where somebody calls and says, hey, somebody's installing Office on my machine. Oh, I didn't do it. I didn't push Office to your machine. Maybe somebody in the help desk did. Well, in order to figure it out, you can run a report, or you can jump to that collection and search for the machine, but if you have 50,000 machines in that collection, it could take a while. So what I did was developed a tool so I could just simply right-click on a collection, or right-click on a computer, and say, what collection are you in? And it just gives me, alphabetically, here's the collections. It also allows me to pass another parameter, so I can look to see if there's a maintenance window, or if I can see what the maintenance window is. Because obviously, if you're in the collection for Office, but is it going to kick off? And this is a problem, let's say, how many people have dropped a computer in Adobe Acrobat 8 collection and Adobe Acrobat 9 collection? They just fight over and over every other day. Somebody has Adobe 8 and Adobe 9. Big problem. Other things you can do, force advertisements, kickoff programs, remote WMI commands, client actions. A lot of these are already out in the community. You can download prepackaged installers that will install these into your console. Setting up a site system. PowerShell, for instance, setting up IIS. PowerShell you can use with 2007. There's a lot of community effort to look at what you can do with PowerShell. Microsoft doesn't have a lot of documentation. So most of their documentation is geared toward VBScript, C# or VBNet, or compiled code. But the next version in 2012, you can see there's a lot of PowerShell. Well, if you can utilize that PowerShell, you can right-click, send a command off. For instance, we can do with Orchestrator. You could right-click and send a command directly from Configuration Manager over to Orchestrator, even though it wasn't designed through that. So there's a lot of things we could do. Loading web pages and patch compliance. A lot of people would like to know, what's the patch compliance of my machine? Well, you could run a report. Again, go type in that machine name. Or you can simply right-click and load the web URL while passing the computer name. Again, saving time. It's that reiteration of saving time. Importing resources. As all of you are very much aware, there is no import in Configuration Manager 2007. If you have R3, you do have the ability to add resources, which is a nice additional feature, but you need to get somebody else's import function to pull in the resources, whether that be a computer resource or a user resource. And there's other things we can do. Has anybody out there created their own internal right-click to perform an action besides what's already out there in the web? 1, 2. Go ahead, stick it up. It's OK. There you go. OK. So look at the 2007 console. Nothing new. It's the MMC, it's all node-based. We're pretty much aware of that. Now we move into 2007. It's all ribbon-based. Ribbons are nothing new to Microsoft. They've had it in multiple other applications. It's brand new to Configuration Manager. It makes life a whole lot simpler. But with that changes console extensions. Now you notice I've yet to say right-click tools because we've gone through a paradigm shift. It's no longer just right-click anymore. Now your actions appear on the ribbon. So though right-click is a community word, we're going to probably start moving away from that. I'm sure we'll see it for the next couple of years. So preparing a machine for 2007, for those of you that just click the installer and run through, or maybe you want to go through and actually see how to do these, what you're going to do is you're going to find this path, the program files, configuration manager, admin UI, XML storage. Then you'll need to create your extensions and actions folders, and then to create your GUID or GUID, depending on how you want to say that. And you're going to have a whole bunch of folders that look like this. What I recommend is inside each one of those folders, go ahead and put what that's associated with. So if it's a collection for, it's a collection or it's a user or whatever that ID is for, put in collections.txt or user.txt. And then inside that, detail what your actions are. So I put this up here just so that you can pull up the slides in case you want to know how to go ahead and create your 2007 extensions. The biggest thing, of course, is utilizing either IE or some XML tool to look at how the file is created. Because if you create and leave a bracket off, nothing's going to show. And let me tell you, I'm sure you're all aware of loading 2007 console. Okay, that's slow. Let me close it. Let me fix that file, reload it. Then you need to close and reopen it constantly. The nice thing is this is the same process that we have in 2012. Nothing's changed, or very little has changed. You have to understand the file structure. It's all XML-based, so I'm sure XML has been around for a number of years. We're all pretty much familiar with it. Actions are read alphanumerically, so depending on how you want them loaded into your console, you need to name them 1, 2, A, B, C, or whatever you're going to name with console extension at the end, or something. Most right-click actions are only one parameter. There are some, like Status Message Viewer and a couple others, that will take multiple parameters. So for instance, if you right-click on a machine that's in a collection, you can pass the computer name or you can pass the collection ID. You can't pass both at the same time. This creates a problem. A lot of people have tried to create right-click tools for right-click remove computer from collection, but then you still have to pop up another box to ask what collection and so forth. The different classes that you have that y'all will mostly use are reports. You'll use executables and the separator in 2007. Reports, most people are not really using the report ID because they want to pass that parameter. So they're using typically executable, loading up Internet Explorer, Mozilla, whatever you want to use, and then passing the URL and the parameter they want to pass, say computer name. The separator is exactly what it is. When you right-click, you have that line, that horizontal line that separates your groups. That's all that is. And when you build a separator, which is a simple one-line command in XML, it's recommended that you go ahead and put that as a separate file so that you can look in your folder and know exactly what the folder is, and it's going to look the same on the console. The 2007 executable XML. Has anybody never seen this before? Never opened up the XML file? Ever looked at it? Okay. So I'll go ahead and zoom into this. The main executable is simply file path and your parameters. The file path, you can have // program files, notepad.exe, so forth. If there's a space, you do not have to put a quote. Again, in parameters, you can pass, for instance, this is the computer name. With spaces, you do not have to put a quote. What parameters can you pass in 2007? Again, Microsoft has no formal documentation on what is passed from the console, so what the parameters are. All you have to do is what most people have done. You can go through the console, which is itself XML-based, and just rip through it and pull anything with double hashtags out. As it was in 2003, we have name and NetBIOS. Both of these pass the computer name, but in certain instances with NetBIOS, it passes a blank. So what I recommend is that you go ahead and use name. And most of the tools that you download that have an installer have, I think, changed that, so it's all in name now. But certain parameters like program name, program ID, collection name, collection ID, advertisement name, advertisement ID, you see where we're going with this. There are a lot of things that are put up here that many people have never used and you might not care about, but you can go through the console and see how Microsoft is using them, such as the network OS path name. You can look at site code, site name, and so forth. When we get to 2012, you'll see a different list, and even then I had to shrink it down because there are so many in there. So what executables can you run through 2007? You can use command files. There's a popular HTA, so if you know VBScript real well, you can go ahead and create HTAs. Amazingly, a lot of people are still using batch files. Anybody out there have batch files running in their HTAs? There are lots of people doing it. Hey, it still works, still use it. Of course, VBScript, which there's a lot of Microsoft documentation on, not only working with the console, but of course out there on the web. PowerShell is coming up. A lot of groups out there, and I think Greg Ramsey and a couple other people have PowerShell sessions here that talk about 2012. There's a lot of things that you can do in 2007. You just have to search the web for it. That's the only problem. And of course, EXE, whether that be a program that you go download by or if you compile it. There's, again, a lot of information on how to write your own compiled C, C# or VB.NET application to interact with the console. For instance, PowerShell. I am by no means an expert in PowerShell. I want a book. It sits on the shelf. It's been cracked open once. I definitely need to learn it because it's going to be heavy in 2012. But for instance, if you're going to do PowerShell, you could, inside your XML file, simply put in the path to the PowerShell and the parameters you're going to pass to it. It is no different than any other thing you're going to do. So anybody out there a PowerShell expert? No? Anybody? Okay, well, there's a need to convert a lot of the current right-click tools into PowerShell just because of the power of it. So if you want, you can go to my website. You can read through a lot of that VBScript and give me a PowerShell version if you'd like. And I will credit you. So let's jump into a 2007 machine. First, we will jump into the console, or the folder, if that would load. So in the main root, you're going to see your admin UI folder. And if we move forward through, we end up finding all of our files. If we open, let's say, this folder, we see a file called 1, obviously 1AB separator, because we want the separator to show first. Then we have all our files, again, alphanumerically. Then we have this folder, or this file here, called computer.txt. That lets me know, and all the other admins, if they're in the console or remote console and so forth, that this is the computer node. This means you're right-clicking on a specific computer. We have a simple XML file that's going to be bracketed by the word action description. You can see it down here. And then again, we have action groups. And this is where you're going to put all of your individualized right-click tools. Within that, we have another action description, which gets that's why it's good to have an XML editor that you can either that or Visual Studio, something that will tab everything out and make it look pretty. We're going to call it an executable. And then I have my file path here. Okay, I'm going to run my VBScript file. The resources I'm going to pass is the resource ID and the number 1. That just means it's going to pass, show me maintenance windows. It's easier to pass resource ID than it is to pass the computer name because then you have to go back and look it up. Configuration Manager most of the time would rather you pass the collection ID, resource ID, and so forth. Let's go ahead and open. Just to let you know how this works, I'm going to open up a one of the VB scripts that we have running here. So first off, we create an object so that we can talk to the WMI. And then, of course, you just put in where in WMI you want to look. So really, to talk to console extensions or to write your own code, all you have to know is to be able to touch WMI and grab information. Depending on what you're doing, it might be easier to reach the SQL server and pull the SQL information out and work with that. It all depends on how fast, where your SQL server is, if you're using PowerShell, and so forth. But all I'm doing here, for instance, this is where's the collection. I'm just passing the collection ID, and there's a lot of lazy properties in here. If you go through the SDK, you'll find out what lazy means. Basically, a lot of times you'll have to loop through. You can't just say, I want the information for collection ID ABC. You have to say, OK, loop through it. Even though there's only one object in there, you still have to loop. Oops. The other tool we have, which is an HTA, again, is simply looking at WMI and finding the collection listing. The difference with this is I'm not passing any parameters. It's a standalone independent application, which means you could run it from anywhere you want as long as it can talk to the provider on the configuration manager server. So you don't have to write something that talks or passes parameters to it. Let's go ahead and do a short look at 2007, and then we can get into the 2012. So for instance, one of the tools I created was where's my collection? And now, of course, all that's been fixed in 2012 because we can search. But for instance, in here, oops, let me right-click up here. I know it's an Adobe folder. So I type in Adobe. It gives me everything with the word Adobe in it. So I can say, well, show me where this folder is. And all it does is go through WMI and pulls out the individual collection I want. And then in the SDK, there's a command called parent to subcollection or parent to collection. And all I do is work up that chain and all the way to the top. So here I know that now my computer or that collection is in Adobe, Adobe X still needing Adobe. So I found it, and I found this machine. For instance, let's see, I want to know where else this computer is. So again, all it does is we reach into that WMI, and we pull out the information. Can you do this through SQL? Yes, you could probably just reach into SQL, but since I'm sitting on the server, it's just as fast to reach into WMI and pull out that information. So moving through, what everybody probably wants to see anyway, is 2007. So how do you prepare a machine for 2012? The main difference between 2012 and 2007, one, is the admin UI and the admin console folder. So if you're trying to look, where do I put it, you're going to look for this folder, admin console. It also makes it easier to go ahead and convert them. So what's new in the 2012 extensions? First off, I'm not going to zoom in because it's a standard XML file, and some of this is available later. Let's look at what actually is new. At the very top, there's a group called Show On, and it says Default Contextual Tab and then Context Menu. This allows us to place it on the ribbon. If you don't have this in there, it doesn't go anywhere. So if you just simply copy your XMLs from 2007 to 2012, nothing's going to load. You need to have this in there. The next section right below that, which is also new, is the ability to have icons. And I'm not going to go through this long code. You just know that it's there. We'll talk about a small piece in a minute. But the idea being is now you can create an icon. Simply, rather than just to right-click and have everything listed, you can use Microsoft icons. You can use your icons. If you're using Icon Blaster or some of those other ones that will actually rip out the DLLs and rip out the icons, you could use one of those. So now we have this nice full movement into something graphical. But what I recommend that you do is don't do the icons first. Just wait till later. It's not a necessity, and we'll show that in a second what happens if you don't use icons. So here's what the ribbon looks like when you have your console extension on there. You have two tabs you can use. One is the contextual tab named Default Contextual tab. The other one is the Home tab, which is duly marked, and it's the Default Home tab. When you put something on the Default Contextual tab, it's going to be named as the object you're clicking on. So if you're clicking on All Systems, you're clicking on something else like an Administration tab, it's going to be named that object. Here's another thing that's going to be changing. If you are using your XML on the Default Contextual tab, if you have multiple icons, it's going to group them like you see here. If you put the exact same XML over on the Home tab, you get a drop-down menu. All right? So again, we have that full paradigm shift that we're moving in 2012. Now we can place it on a certain ribbon. We can use either groups or drop-down menus. You cannot choose where on the ribbon it's going to appear. Microsoft is going to do that for you. If your extensions outmatch or outplace the ones that are already there for Microsoft, their icons, Microsoft will shrink their icons into a single icon and create a drop-down menu for you. So be aware when you put your icons on there, you might have it shifted over or dropped. So here's where you're going to put that information in that first line. The second line, which says context menu, doesn't change. Do not modify that. Do not move it around. One thing you'll notice, at least on this, first off, if you don't use an icon, it's going to be a small circle or a large circle. If you use an icon, this is what I have here, I've simply used the Microsoft import icon. I just kind of stole it out of the console and used it. So here we have the exact same XML. Display name is moved between the context menu, the contextual menu, and the Home tab. So you'll notice one is called, oops, wrong one. The group name is called Large Icons. And of course, the individual action name is called Display Name. In here, you see where on your Home, this is where the name is, and then it puts Display Name down here. And of course, you can have individual icons for individual actions as well. What's changed in the 2012 XML? Really nothing. You can pretty much copy your information from 2007 to 2012. You do need to put that show on string, that section into the XML, and then you're up and running. So it's a pretty nice and simple thing to do. One thing I've been working on and have yet not completed was a converter to read your 2007 folder structure, convert your XML files, and convert the folder structure. I have not yet completed that. And by the time Rick completes the new installer for the 2012 version of the console extensions, I probably don't need it anymore at all. But if we look at what on executable, exactly the same thing. So there's nothing changed here. We simply, again, put in our path, pass our parameters, and move on. So here's the code for showing an icon. Basically, you need to make sure that you just copy and paste this into the XML file right below the show on group. The two things you need to be aware of is where it says assembly, you'll have a DLL. This is the DLL that contains your icon. The other section that you need to know of is image resource name. This is the name of the individual icon you're going to load. So for instance, I used import object. And all I did was go through the Microsoft XML files in the console to pull out this particular one. We now have that paradigm shift. So we have large icons, small icons. We can put it on the contextual tab menu, the home tab. We can do lots of different things. If you want to use a small icon, the only thing that you need to add at the very top of your action description is ribbon display type. So you're going to type in text and small image. This is going to make your icon small. Realize that, again, if you're using actual icons and you haven't tested everything, it'll basically just disappear. It'll have the program group called small icons and nothing will be there. You can't click on it. If you right-click and run down, you can find it. But again, be aware when you're working with icons, do that at the very end of your whole process. So how do we get the large icons? So you can, this is just a standard XML file. You can pull it down later. It's just here for information. Well, basically, to get large icons, you do absolutely nothing. Again, it's default behavior. From 2007 to 2012, you have a large icon. Again, if you do not use an actual icon, DLL, it's going to create this little circle thing. If you make a small one, it's going to create a small circle. There's nothing wrong with that, at least in the beginning. Get going. Then once you're familiar, then you can start using actual icons to change that image. So reports. A lot of people still use the report ID from 2007. Obviously, report IDs, all those IDs have changed in 2012, so you need to go look them up. But if you want to launch it, you simply use the report description, type in the ID, and then when you right-click, it'll launch that report. Now, if you do this when I was actually working with this in the very beginning, in the beta version, when you did the reports, it popped up a little box that said, I'm sorry, this action is not yet available. So I had to wait to actually test everything until the RC came out. And again, down here, we show that you can have both a report and executable running. Microsoft, again, doesn't care. It's just a standard XML group. It's a standard action. So what parameters can you pass in 2012? There are a lot of parameters. And I spent hours combing through trying to find the best ones. When I ran an export, basically ran a VB script file that went and just churned through everything, it created several pages of IDs, of parameters. The standard ones are still there: your name, NetBIOS, package ID, package name, program name, and so forth. New things that you see are, for instance, deployment type, because they have the new app model we have to be aware of. We have things like Forest FQDN, software name, description, common name, site code. So these are just a few of what you can at least pass from the console. I don't know what all of them do. Microsoft does not document them. In the current SDK, they basically give you a short list in what you can do. But otherwise, you have to basically go through the XML console and figure out how is Microsoft passing these parameters over. Another paradigm shift, we just keep moving into the new things, right, in 2012, is basically filter and conditional actions. So what I mean by that is now, this is do a show dialog box, you can turn on and off focus on certain icons as they appear. For those of you that have already used the 2012 console in the lab or at home, as you click on things, you'll notice that certain icons disappear or at least move out of focus. You can't use them until you click on a certain object. Microsoft has extended that same application process to you. So to do this, we're showing it on the contextual tab. What we're going to match is the pattern is we want MS asynchronous RAS. That's what we're actually going to look at. The nice thing that Microsoft has actually done for you as well is you can use regular extensions, or regular expressions, sorry. So you can do, for instance, site code, or if you have a computer group where everybody is named ACT for accounting and ENG for engineers. If you want an action associated only towards the accounting department, you can use regular expressions and detect them and then turn on an icon. We're looking at the address types. That's the value we're going to match. And then what's going to happen is when we click on it, when it actually comes into focus, we're going to turn on the dialog box for the asynchronous RAS sender address. You can use this for executables. You can use this for pretty much anything. So again, we have that full move what we did in 2007, okay, what can we do in 2012 opens up a whole new era. What can we do with this? So I've come up with a couple things, but I'm hoping the community at large will come up and decide, hey, let's do this, let's do that. One thing that's already come to me was somebody asking, hey, in 2007, we really wanted the ability to click on a machine and tell if it's online or not. Well, I've tried and trick the console with that, and you still can't get it to work. So you still can't tell your machines if they're on or offline inside the console simply by changing the console extensions. Come on, move. There we go. Let's go ahead and jump into the 2012. One thing I want to show you inside the XML storage, which is the root folder for most of your extensions, there's a folder called console root. Let me go ahead and zoom in on this. This is, much like in 2007, the XML that will build the console. So you can simply go through all these XML files. You can figure out how Microsoft is using the console extensions, how they're using icons, how they're using the filter conditional actions, basically by simply going through here. And that's all I did, was to build the GUID locator, much like Greg Ramsey had in 2007. Same thing I did here in 2012. I simply read the XML files and just exported every ID I could find out of it. So go through here, take a look if you want to see. We can at least open one. I don't think we need to go through multiple ones. But you can see how they have the icons. You can go down and you can grab, I'll move over, the ID associated with that area. And there's a lot more IDs, and of course, all the IDs have changed. So that's another thing we have to learn. So let's go into our... So this particular node is the device collections. Again, I know that because I created a file. Otherwise, I wouldn't have this memorized by now. So I have an extension, and all this extension does is it's going to show it to you on the default contextual tab. It will show an icon, and all we're looking at is loading up Notepad. Another file that we have in here, this is the ability to do the filtering. So what I'll show you here is the ability to click on collections, and then once we reach the one that we're actually looking for, which is ID TST000A, the icon will come into focus, and we can actually execute our console extension at that point. Let's go ahead and open up the console. And one thing you'll notice, obviously, it loads a lot faster. I'm sure we're all thankful for that. So here we have, you'll notice, here's the Home tab. Because I've already clicked, if I say click on All Mobile, the All Mobile Devices tab will appear because this is the contextual tab that I selected. And on there, I have my small tool. If you hover over it, it's going to give you the name and the description. Just like you had in 2007, it would give you a description at the very bottom of the screen. This one will now give it to you right below the icon. To show you how fast, oops, don't do that. We'll close the console. I have multiple files to move over. If you are testing your console extensions, you cannot name them .bat or .bck or some other file. If the file is in there and it's a valid XML file, it will load. So if I go ahead and actually rename these to TXT, it still will load the console. All Microsoft cares is it reads through and looks for a valid XML format. So be aware of that. If you're testing something and you don't want it to show to all users, or you don't want to show it to you all the time, move it to a folder. So let's again open up our console, which is nice and fast. Oops. Oops. So over on the Home tab, I have 3 different things running. I have what's called individual collection. This is my filter, which we're going to show. I have large icons, which has a drop-down menu, and then just a single small icon here. If you'll notice, because I've taken up much of the ribbon, Microsoft has dropped theirs into a single icon called Collection and Deployment. So then you'd have to run down here and run through everything. So be aware of that. If you drop your stuff on here and you expand it, maybe you want to keep it on the contextual tab. It's up to how your office determines to use it. If, for instance, we were to right-click and run down, which is pretty hard to see, but we have a test icon. We have small icons. You notice there's no icon there. That's because the file is created incorrectly. So because I have something wrong in the file, it just doesn't load the icon. Then we have our small one. If I were to click on one of these and click this tab, Properties is not available to me. I come down here again, Properties is not available to me. If I come down to I know, because it says Filter Test, oops, and scroll back up. I just jumped my folder. Come on, main one. Okay. Now it's actually activated. So if I click on this, if I had something to open, it would then open. This is also valid if I were to right-click on it but you notice, again, since I don't have the XML configured properly, it's going to disappear. So again, you have to make sure that you have your files correct. I also, if we move back and forth between the Home, our Home tab, so again, Home tab, drop-down menus, make sure you're aware of that. The contextual tab does not have it. It will group it. So you can see we have a single small icon, 2 large icons, 2 small icons. Pretty much, you can do whatever you want. So you don't have to, of course, I used all the Microsoft icons. You could have a drop-down menu with different icons, or simply use it like you see here with a little circle. One other thing that we're going to look at for those of you that are already interested to see where everything is, I've created, this is the export of every XML file out there, of every ID, so we can run through the list. If I load the console, everywhere that you can click, you're going to see this ID. This tells me this is where I need to be, pull it off, and I can use that from my right-click tool or console extension. I haven't tested every single one of these. I doubt that you can use every single area of this. There are places that you'll see where you have the ability to have 2 different icons up there. So depending on what you're doing, so go to administration, let's say, for instance, hierarchy configuration. This is one of the ones that Microsoft puts in. They give you 2 little icons that you can use inside the Home tab or the contextual tab. I'm not sure you would use anything here, but again, the option is available to you. One thing that is available to you The MVPs this year were allowed to create labs, self-paced labs. So how many have actually gone and used the self-paced labs? A little higher, there you go. Okay. There's a section called MVP track. If you go in that section, we have several labs that some of us have created. Some of them are 15 minutes long. Some of them go up to an hour long on how to do something inside the console. Basically, I have what we've done here sitting over there. So if you don't want to have to wait and pull my slides, if you don't want to have to wait to see the code, you're going across the hall. So I went across the hall, pull up on the MVP track, understanding console extensions for 2012. Then you can go through and you can rip apart my XML files, you can play with them, you can tweak it, you can do whatever you want. So obviously I have some of this stuff on my blog as well, but the nice thing is you don't have to wait. You can run across the hall and work on that right now. So what's changed for console extensions? Well, first off, there's no sub-collections via the SDK. So for instance, the where's my collection doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't need to work. That code has been pulled out of the SDK. So now, since you have the ability to search folders, you can just do it that way. We now have device and user collections. So if you're not aware, you cannot have devices and users sharing the same collection. They have to be separated. So if you have tools in which you import users or import resources, if it's a user or if it's a computer, they have to be separated, which means rewriting some of your code or talking to the person that wrote the code in the first place. You have to keep them separated. We can now filter extensions. So we can do some kind of filter or conditional statement to turn on and off icons. We have large and small icons. You can see this whole big change from what we had before. In addition, we have the ability to have icon groups. We have the contextual tab and the home tab. Again, the contextual tab will group your icons. The home tab allows you to do drop-down menus. So be aware of that when you create and you're testing your console extensions. And of course, like all good things must end, all the IDs for all the folders are totally different. So for those of you that memorize at least the first 4 digits, okay, I know this folder is collections, I know this folder is a machine, you have to do that all over again. Again, that's why I built the locator tool like we had in 2007. That is available right now on my blog, on my website, as well as in the lab over there like we did just here. So it creates that long list. So if you want to have that information before you leave, run over, open the log, write down some of those file names. I don't think you can copy them off, but obviously they're pretty small. And of course, since my slide deck is available, you can go online and just copy the code directly out. That's why I had several pages of just straight code, though we didn't zoom in on it, so you can use that right now. Some references. The latest SDK, as of at least last week, was still January of 2012. Since Microsoft has just released the product, they're slowly rolling out information. The current SDK is not available for general download. You need to go on the Microsoft Connect site. Is everybody familiar with what the Connect site is? Is there a hands of who does not even know what the Connect site is? Okay. The Connect site is basically a lot where the beta versions are. There's also where the beta forum groups are. If you want to complain about something in 2007 or 2012 and you say, you know what, I want this changed, go to the Connect site, log in for that specific product, for let's say Configuration Manager 2012, and say, I would like to request a design change. What is your design change? I want to do this. Or if you find a problem in the console, if it crashes for whatever reason, or doesn't perform how you want it to, or you'd expect it to, you can go in here and submit a problem. A Microsoft engineer will start getting back to you and asking for logs and collect information. It is not a replacement for CSS, for contacting customer support. It is a place for you to say this is a design problem in the console. If you want to learn about some of the GUIDs, I have a link there. I also have the 2007 locator, for those of you that are not aware of it, made by Greg Ramsey. And then I have the 2012 locator that I created back in the beta days, which I've looked. It doesn't look like it's changed from beta to RC, so we should be good on that. Two websites you might want to look at. One is my blog. I try to get in there and update a lot of things. Most of the time I'm doing console extensions or something that's brand new or something that's neat inside Configuration Manager. The other thing is my website, sccmtools.com. This is basically a large repository of right-click tools, or it could be certain PowerShell tools, advertisement tools, because you could send down an advertisement to perform an action on a machine. It's also a place where certain vendors, if you want to go ahead and say, hey, I have this tool that will perform an action, it's basically like a console extension but built in, I can put it on the website as well. I also have linked to blogs, so I try to update those blog sites. So if you find a good blog, you can send it to me and I'll put it up there. It's a good resource. I try to keep things updated. When we moved from 2003 to 2007, I had to make a change. Obviously, this site is designed for 2007, so hopefully soon I'll be redesigning things to break it into 2007 and 2012. That concludes the session. I'll ask the question, does anybody have any questions? But I'm assuming the blank looks are, go ahead and go to the microphone right next to you. Well, if you can speak in the microphone right there, or you can, it should be on.
You have any plans for Console-matic?
No, I still don't understand that. It's hard to hear. Come here. I'll repeat the question. Or actually, I'll come down to you. How about that? So what's your question? Since it's not amplifying very well.
Do you have any plans for Console-matic?
No. Yes. No, I do not have a Twitter account. Sorry. People have asked me that, but with all the other social networking things going on, I don't have Twitter. On my website, on the SCCM Tools website, you can email me through info@sccm-tools.com, and I'll reply back to that. So, and if you find a problem on my website also, I'll reply and give you the information. Are the labs or? No, there is no learning on how to do the console extensions. Pretty much the first time you've ever been able to learn console extensions is the lab that I created in there. So if you go in there, it's a 15-minute lab. It's called the lunch lab. You can run through the process. You can figure out how to do it, or you can look at my website and feel free to email me and say, hey, I'm having a problem. This won't load, or how do I do it? I have no problems with helping you. Anybody else? Everybody still awake?
I don't think this is on, though.
No?
Oh, yeah. Is the only reason to reference the DLL in the XML for icon storage?
The only idea for it is to pull that icon out.
But you could create your own DLL with icon resources?
Yes, you can create your own DLL, or you can steal one from somebody else. And
it would be stored in the bin location for Config Manager, or would it be stored with the XML?
It should be in the bin folder. That's my assumption, only because I've been using the Microsoft specific DLLs, but I would imagine it needs to be in that folder.
I got a quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
So as far as converting your VB script code that you have right now into PowerShell
It echoes,
for 2012, you can't hear me.
Okay, go ahead.
As far as converting your code that you have in VB script to PowerShell, I know you said you're looking for volunteers, but is there a plan on having like a community built on your site or something?
There is several community sites that are not really structured that are doing PowerShell out there. The MVPs have discussed trying to set up something either on my IT forum or on my website so that we can put a group of specific console extensions in PowerShell. Since everybody needs to start learning PowerShell for 2012, it is heavily integrated into the product.
Can I get a copy of the SDK 2012?
In order, you have to go to the Microsoft Connect website and then log into the Configuration Manager 2012 site. In Downloads, there is the SDK. It says SDK there. And it should say January 2012. And it's... Okay, well maybe they are changing it. I haven't been in the last several days, so I don't know if they've, because of the whole marketing and now that we're moving into 2012, since it's been RTM'd and released, if that's still available. But I do what? It's the Microsoft Connect website. Then you need to go to Configuration Manager 2012. In there, on the left-hand side, you'll have a download button. Under downloads, it's a long list. You should be able to find SDK or help files, and it's just a zip. It'll open up. It's a help file that you can run through and search, and it has all pretty much good information for getting with console extensions. Some information is kind of ambiguous, so they're working on it, which obviously, because it's coming RTM, that file will be totally updated, but I do have stuff on my website as well. And you can always email me. To build your own console extensions in 2012, it's pretty much the exact same process. You can use Visual Studio if you're going to use a node. All the information is in the SDK on how to build within the console instead of using actions to build outside. So what you want to do is you can compile code. That information is inside the SDK. Yes. And there is, again, because there's some information that's not there, it's coming. You should be able to at least start on the process. Are there any Wake on LAN tools there are several free tools for Wake on LAN, and a lot of them are command line based. And what I've done is I've just actually downloaded them and then used the console to right click and pass the parameter. So the Wake on LAN solution has no idea configuration manager's there. You just use it to launch the command. Yeah, you can, if you want to call multiple computers, then you have to write a VB script or PowerShell that let's say you pass the collection ID, read machines in the collection, and then pass that into a loop to that tool.
Does it use computer names, or do you grab MAC address on it?
Well, yes, you have used MAC address for most of the Wake on LAN solutions. Yes, you can do in the WMI query the computer's MAC address. Now here's the problem. There's multiple MAC addresses because your machine creates VPNs and all that stuff. So there are a lot of people out there that says, here's the WMI query to grab the real MAC address. So rather than recreating it, trying to figure it out, you just go online, search, pull up the specific query to find MAC addresses.
You don't have that on your blog, right?
I could probably put it on my blog. I can probably get up there pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. It's still, Configuration Manager 2012 is not real time, so you can't get information directly back unless there are some people that are creating real-time solutions, third-party developers that have built something inside the console to do that. But out of the box, Configuration Manager does not do that. Okay?